The one specific moment that I wanted to focus on this morning is the same that many of your kids are focusing on this morning. We will get to that in just a minute. But last week, to catch you up, we saw the Israelites sending a committee of 12 men into the Promised Land. The fear and the lack of faith of 10 of those men prevented the whole group from reaching this blessing, this gift that God had planned to give them. 40 years later, Joshua chooses 2 men to go into Jericho and spy out the land, and not 12. Maybe you heard in the video, there was a line that stood out to me that I wanted to ask, and this is maybe kind of our warm-up discussion question for today. But he made the statement, committees seldom make courageous decisions, they make safe decisions. I heard that, and it kind of slapped me in the head. And I thought to myself, I wanted to hand that sentence to you, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. I've got in this room, in this collection of people, I've got people from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different professional backgrounds, people with different types of work and life experience. And so I would just like to hear your thoughts on that statement. The statement again, committees seldom make courageous decisions, they make safe decisions. What are your thoughts on that statement? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And if you do agree, is it a good thing or a bad thing? I'd love to hear what you think about that statement. Safety, so you're thinking safety in terms of making sure that their position within the committee is safe and secure.
Yes.
Fair enough. All right, good. What else? Go ahead.
So I work in education. I'm an administrator. And so we are constantly working on committees to make changes for schools.
Yeah.
A lot of times, I'm pretty, 20-something years in the classroom, and I was a STEM teacher, wanting innovation, like let's grow the education, and a lot of times I was met with resistance, and a lot of times with safety, shooting on rockets, shooting on, can't do that,
Yeah.
But when you're working with kids, and of course I'm an administrator now, but I'm still coming from this, why do we wonder why things get stuck? It's because we're dealing with people and their lives and what we want to do, what's safe, and pride. Exactly, almost every time we're on a committee, when you have something that's unsafe for a child or their families, you're going to be met with legal things, financial things, so on. So I agree.
So, okay. So I spent 13 years in public education, 12 in the classroom. And it was amazing to me to watch. And I think it was well-intentioned. And I think that it was always with that we want to protect everybody mentality, but to watch bold teachers who had great, novel, interesting ideas get that life kind of sucked out of them by that death by committee approach. Not that it happens everywhere.
No, and I've always been the one that faces it. I'm
Yeah.
the one, but then I'm always like, oh yeah, I know this isn't safe. Is it legal? Is it safe? Is it ethical?
Well, those are all good questions to ask.
Then if we can talk about all these
Yeah,
things,
that's right.
then we can talk
Yeah.
about what's the big risky thing
Yeah.
that we're going to try next.
I remember creating 10 years ago, creating a program in the school district I was at that we were doing family therapy for our elementary alternative placement kids, right? So elementary kids would go to alternative placement, and I would get their parents, and we would do family therapy with the parents. Okay, nothing I just said sounds like there should be a giant roadblock, but when it got to the committee stage, how are we exposing ourselves to legal liability? Took 2 years to get through. That was frustrating. Yeah.
I think it kind of boils down to that difference between 2 different personality types.
Okay.
You have the people that they see a mountain and they go, okay, I want to go to the top of the mountain. But you've got probably 2 or 3 people that as soon as you say that,
Yep.
they're on the path. And they're already up on the mountain, while all these other people are there discussing what route they're going to take, how they're going to get there, what they're going to do.
What they're going to put in their packs. Who gets to walk in front?
And the ones that are just already up on the mountain,
Yeah.
the courageous ones. Because they have enough faith
Sure.
to know that whatever they come across, they're just going to deal with it and take care of it and do the best they can and be safe in the process.
Well-
but they're also going to be bold enough to take that step forward. So I'm one of those on top of the mountain kind of people. Now,
So to me, the goal is we want to go rocky. We want to hit the one in the middle, right? So I've said before, I don't know any smart people quotes. I'm not one of those people who I have one that I use a lot, and it's Socrates, and it's that virtue is the equal distance between 2 extremes. So I think I apply that thinking to so many areas in our culture right now. I don't want to be too far this way, too far this way. I want to try as best I can to be reasonable, because there's room for people who just say, that's where we're going, great, let's go. And there's room for somebody else who says, like, whoa, maybe grab some water before you head up the mountain.
It's all about that balance.
Yeah,
Having that
that's right.
balance and having those different ideas.
Yeah.
And I think that's why committees are great, because the people that are safe will bring up things that the people that
Yeah.
are to the top of the mountain wouldn't even ever think of or consider.
And it's hard to find that balance, though, right? So for those who want to charge headlong, that issue that I brought up a minute ago about the district I was in, how are we exposing ourselves to legal liability? Well, therapist Ryan was very frustrated by that question. Realistically, that's a valid question. That is a valid question worth asking. And I know I got at least one attorney sitting over there thinking, yeah, I can make a good case for that. Okay, what do you got?
I'm a recovering politician.
I want to end class right there. That is my favorite sentence. So I have to edit out people talking so they can't hear. The statement was, I'm a recovering politician. Please continue.
So I served on a lot of committees, and a few weeks ago, I stumbled across a great quote that great leaders don't create followers, they create leaders.
Ooh, great leaders don't create followers, they create leaders. Okay, you're 2 for 2. Keep going. Is that it? That's good. That's fine. That's fine. No, I for some reason in my mind I was like, okay, this is great. Keep going. Tell me more. That was the end. You just gave me that was the perfect intro for I was going to let you come up and talk now. All right, that's fine. So let me ask you questions. So we're talking about committees, and we're talking about the frustrating nature of committees. Let me ask you a question that is applicable, I think, for us professionally, but I also think it's applicable. So a lot of us in this room are parents of kids or grandparents of kids. We've got kids in the kids program right now. So let me ask a question that is, maybe you're going to think professionally, and that's okay. We can talk professionally. Maybe you think personally. But how do you influence change when there are a lot of voices that need to be considered? When you're in a room, let's call it go back to that committee idea, right? So you're within a group of people who all want the same thing. You're all moving in the same direction. You have very different ideas of how to get there. There's a lot of pushing and pulling. School and administration is one of the most perfect examples of this. We all have the best interest of kids, hopefully, in mind, and you're all driving towards the same thing, but there's a lot of different ways to get there. How do you influence change when there are a lot of voices that need to be considered?
I think you just, I'm not sure what your name is. I'm sorry.
Catherine.
You just do it. And sometimes good things happen, and sometimes you don't get to be on the committee again.
And sometimes Kurt has to speak up for legal liability when we just do things.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be, use some common sense, but if everybody's just gonna be sitting there, and I'm a note taker, so I'm gonna throw myself out there too. If you're just sitting there taking notes and you're not speaking up and you're not doing anything, that's a lot of this and not a lot of,
Okay.
it's a lot of talking and no walking,
All right, good.
I think it has to be that way. Like if we look at even, historical inventors or changes that we see today, it always starts with one person
Sure.
and that person's idea,
Yeah.
and then they get people on board. I don't think it could ever happen, like talking about innovation, or I don't think that could ever happen
Absolutely.
in a committee, because the whole idea of a committee is to have these people with multiple perspectives, which
Right.
is a good thing, to have discussion.
Yeah.
But then the goal is to then come to a compromise. And the connotation of a compromise is
I've given
the
things
safe
up.
bet.
Yeah,
It's
I've
the
given
safe
things up.
bet.
Well, so my question though, so what if you're that person, you're that innovator, you're that person who's pushing, who wants change, who wants things to be different. How do you push for that in the midst, because committees are where great ideas go to die. And so how do you fight through that? Holly, what do you got?
Well, this sounds rude because you're saying every voice should be considered, but sometimes not every voice should be considered.
Okay. Keep going, Holly.
I mean, you're all laughing, but it's
No, that's fine. I'm only laughing because you said it and I didn't. Go ahead.
Well, because some people's ideas, like what she said, there is typically
Right.
one person. Just like in class, there is one leader in your group, and there are people who aren't going to do anything. And it's supposed
Yeah.
to do. Like, you have the one person who, we don't all have that gift.
Sure.
But the people who do,
Hey.
they should use it and go.
I think you said something that is, I think you said a lot of things that are, I think, powerful and appropriate to this conversation. But one of them is, there's something you just said at the end that I don't think we culturally, I don't think we like to say. And that is that there are some people with leadership abilities who need to be empowered to lead. And who, by their gifting, we're given lots of different responsibilities and lots of different gifts. That one feels uncomfortable for people to say out loud, that I was gifted as a leader, so I want to lead. Because generally speaking, our perception as people who want to be led is that the person who stands up and wants to lead is not the person that we want to lead us. Despite the fact that that may be their gifting. So it's there's a weird paradox here where we should value leadership abilities, but oftentimes, because we tend to, it's a weird paradox.
Well, yeah, I mean, you take Moses, for example, he didn't want to. God had
Right.
kind of saying
Yeah.
yes, 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 yes.
Mhm.
And then, think of American history, George Washington. He was a leader,
Yeah.
he was a commander, but he also
Who could have been a king if he had wanted to.
Right, and
Yep.
he didn't want to be president, and then he chose to step down. Some people are
Yep.
leaders, I don't know.
I'm glad you brought up George Washington. The American history teacher in me is very happy right now. No, because you're right. It's interesting. People who have that leadership ability need to be empowered to lead. So I do think you're right. The one thing that I don't know if I'm going to push back on it or if I'm going to just maybe change a word. So you said not every opinion needs to be considered. In principle and in theory, you're right. There are some ideas are dumb. And so if you've ever sat in a committee and said there are no bad ideas, let's start throwing stuff out, which we did literally this week. And Alan and I went back and forth as to which one of us could come up with the dumber idea. I won by a long shot. But the idea to me is that you're right. Not every idea is a good idea. To me, just so I kind of close the chapter here on this conversation, because I do want to get into our content since we spent 20 minutes opening. But to me, the idea, how do we drive change? If you're in a group of people, if you're in a committee, if you're in a collective situation, the first way I think we drive change is that while not all ideas are good ideas, it's hard to convince somebody or it's hard to get somebody off of a bad idea that you haven't listened to. And so I say that because if you want to facilitate change, if you want to facilitate growth, one of the first things to do is you need to listen. You need to be someone who listens intently. Your children, for those of you with little kids and for those of you with teenagers, your children are going to have lots of dumb ideas over the years. They may have had 2 or 3 this morning. And you may be able to identify really quickly that these ideas that they've got, these plans that they've got are kind of dumb. However, I would encourage you, number one, to not use that word. And number two, I would encourage you before attempting to facilitate change, even if they're kids, you have to hear what's being said first. Before you can take a counterpoint, you need to know the point. Before you can be a driver for change, you have to be able to hear what the counterpoint is. As a husband, as a father, as somebody who works in the church, as a therapist, I try my best to ensure to be a good listener before I'm a talker. And if you know me, that's really hard because as soon as things pop in my head, they tend to just come out. So I have to remind myself regularly and routinely, even with my 9-year-old, with my 5-year-old, I have to remind myself to listen intently before I get to my idea. All right, so with that in mind, so we have a slight change in how the promised land was approached. So rather than sending a committee of people in, Joshua sends 2 people into Jericho. Jericho is where we're going to focus just this morning. If you want to go ahead and turn to Joshua chapter 6, we are going to be in Joshua chapter 6. I wanted to just read the full passage, and I'm going to read it from here. So hang on. Joshua chapter 6, we're going to read verses 1 through 21. So if you want to follow along with me, that's where we're going to be. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all of the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat. I want to pause for just a second. We're going to keep going through this, but I want to recognize for just a minute how ridiculous and insane these instructions are. I know that sounds weird, but we're going to focus on that for just a minute. I wanted to point it out before we keep going. And all the people shall go up, everyone straight before him. So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord. And he said to the people, go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord. All right, we're in verse 8. And just as Joshua had commanded the people, and 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets, with the ark of the covenant, the Lord following them. The armed men were walking before the priests who were blowing the trumpets, and the rear guard was walking after the ark while the trumpets blew continually. But Joshua commanded the people, you shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you shall shout. I want to pause there. We're going to keep going, but I want to identify for just a second Joshua's commitment to instructions that, as I told you a minute ago, make no practical sense. Okay, moving on to verse 11. So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going about it once. And they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. We're going to keep rolling. Verse 12. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. And the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord walked on, and they blew the trumpets continually. And the armed men were walking before them, and the rear guard was walking after the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets blew continually. And the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. So they did for 6 days. On the 7th day they rose early. At the dawn of the day they marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. I want to pause there too and point out that sentence, shout, for the Lord has given you the city, nothing's happened yet. Joshua's faith in this moment is really, really powerful. Verse 17, and the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in the house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. That's a part of the story we kind of skipped over. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. All the silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. All right, I want to give you my reactions to what we just read, and then there's some conversation points that I want to pause on. First of all, there's a common theme. Old Testament battle scenes are one of my favorite things to read. They're one of my favorite things to teach, because there are some themes that we see in them, and themes that I think are super applicable to where we are in our culture. The theme in all of these is that, first of all, the victory is assured because it's won by God. That is probably the simplest place to start with these stories, is that victory is assured not because of the strength of the people, not because of the military innovation or the military strategy of the human beings involved. Victory is assured because it's won by God. And we see a number of different times in these Old Testament battle scenes, we see these instructions, or we see these parts of God's intervention that just make no practical sense to us as human beings. And we'll get to that in just a second. The second thing that I want to point out, by the way, victory is assured because it's won by God. There were 2 other Old Testament battle scenes that I wanted to focus on today. For the sake of time, I don't think we're going to be able to go through them, but I may reference Gideon and the Midianites in Judges 7, one of my favorite biblical stories. And then Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles 17, another fantastic example of God intervening in these Old Testament battle scenes in a way that I think is super applicable to us. All right, so the second thing, and this is a point of emphasis that I think is worth dwelling on for us in our current culture, in our current moment. God requires something of the people in these Old Testament battle scenes in order for the battles to be won. He provides, and he provides the victory, but he requires action-oriented people. In these moments, God's victory includes his people being active and being engaged. He could have, in the moment that we're looking at now, Jericho, the Israelites could have crossed into the Promised Land. They come up against Jericho, which was probably historically kind of a military outpost based on its geography. It was probably filled with soldiers as opposed to being filled with a lot of people. The Rahab person that we find who protects the spies. There were certainly some people in this military outpost, probably more of a military outpost though than a city, and there would have been an inn and some other places based on where it sat geographically. God could have easily, as the Israelites walked into the Promised Land, could have just started evaporating enemies. Could have sent a plague through the places where they were. Could have just lit them on fire with miraculous flame from heaven, and he chose not to do that. Instead, he chose to use people to make those people uncomfortable and to make them active. He chose for the people in these moments to be participants in his plan. And the reason I say that is because I think for a lot of us, we pray for divine intervention in our lives, but we don't want to actually be an active participant in God's plan. We struggle sometimes with the idea that we may be active participants in God's plan for our city, for our community, for our family, for our church. So I say that because I want to make sure that we're emphasizing the fact that in these Old Testament battle scenes, which we oftentimes kind of blow past. We look for the geography, we look for the history, but we sometimes forget that all of these moments require something of the people involved. So a question I have for you this morning, and this one's rhetorical. You don't have to raise your hand and answer this question. Are you an action person? Are you prone to praying for intervention, for God to fix it for you, and then just kind of waiting without looking for ways that he may be calling you into the battle? I would wonder, and this is again a rhetorical question, you don't have to raise your hand and tell me. I would wonder how often in our lives we have prayed for God to do things in our lives, to work in our lives, and then really quickly he's opened a door that you didn't walk through, despite the fact that that's what you were praying for. It's praying for, give me this, bless me in this way, bless my family in this way, bless this person that I'm thinking about, that I'm worried about. And then God opened the door for you, and you thought, yeah, but let somebody else do that. I say that because it's important for us to at times ask ourselves the question, are we action-oriented people or not? Because I think we see that theme in these moments. The third point I wanted to make about the Battle of Jericho is that God seems to ask the same basic thing of all of the people in these accounts. So I just referenced three. I referenced Jericho, which we're on this morning. I referenced Gideon, and I referenced Jehoshaphat, which I just like referencing Jehoshaphat whenever I can. It's one of my favorite biblical names. I'm waiting for somebody to name their kid Jehoshaphat. I almost had April convinced, but we went with Lincoln instead. I thought Jehoshaphat, little fatty, that'd be a good name, right? All right, so God tends to ask the same basic thing of all these people. And the thing he asks is this: fight with confidence while I ask you to do things that you don't understand. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. Fight with confidence. Move forward in confidence as I ask you to do things that you don't understand. Walking around Jericho silently for 6 days and then walking around it more times on the 7th and blowing ram's horns is nonsensical. No military, Patton wouldn't have done that. There's never been a military general who said, all right, I got it. We're going to walk around them every day, like 6 times. And the 7th, we're going to yell at them. That's not good military strategy. This is not something that was done because of the genius of the military strategy. It was done specifically to show the power of God in this moment, not to show the power of the military strategy. Intentionally, I'm going to reference Gideon. I wanted to give more of the backstory. Gideon, if you'll remember this biblical moment, Gideon is chosen. He has no business being chosen, and he has this big, giant fighting force of tens of thousands of soldiers. And over the story of Gideon, God specifically whittles away all of his soldiers until he's left with 300 of them. So he takes this big, mighty fighting force, and then he strips it down to nothing, to a fighting force that won't withstand any army. And he actually says in that account why he did it. He did it because he didn't want anyone to make the mistake of thinking that the army had done the winning. He wanted them to know that God was the one who had done the winning. All right, so here's why I'm referencing this. If you ever feel like all of your resources have been stripped away, if you ever feel like you were up against something insurmountable, if you ever feel like there's no practical way for victory in this moment in my life, it is possible you are right where God wants you to be. Because when that victory is won, you won't be fooled into thinking that it was yours. That you will be able to lean on the power that you saw in your life from God, not from your own smarts. God, in giving his people victory in a lot of these Old Testament battle accounts, asks people to do things that simply make no sense to us. I think, and that's just a me opinion, I think there's a reason for that. So I have my thoughts, but I want to ask you a question with these last few minutes. God asks in this story in the Battle of Jericho, he asks the people involved to do something that makes no military sense, it makes no practical sense. Why might that be? What are we supposed to learn from these Old Testament moments where God says, do something that's kind of bizarre, and then you're going to see how powerful I am? Why might you think God does that in these moments?
I think he's asking us to do the same thing. If we're living a life that we're supposed to be living, if we're doing the will of God, then in this culture, we should be doing things that don't make sense. We should be spending money on people who don't have things. We should be uncomfortable with our contributions and, the time that we spend doing things for others. Our culture should look at us and be like, that makes no sense.
Breezy, I have absolutely nothing to add to that other than an amen. I think the picture that you painted of the culture around us, looking at our behavior and thinking that makes no sense whatsoever, I could not agree with you more. We're in a moment where there's a lot of instability in a lot of places. We won't go through and trace all the dots, but there's a lot of instability in a lot of places. The idea that a group of people, a body of people that just come from a belief system, that's their only unifying, the fact that they would all care about each other, that they would all love each other, they would all tend to each other, and then would tend to the outside world as well, makes absolutely no sense. That they would give of their time, that they would give of their money, that they would give of their resources, that they would give of their blessings to bless other people in this culture makes absolutely no sense. Jason, this morning, if you were in first service, you already heard it. If you're going to be in second service, he focuses on a passage in Philippians that's really powerful. And in chapter 2, verse 21, Paul makes the reference that everyone looks out for their own interests, not for the interest of Jesus Christ. And I think for those in a culture around us, seeing us behave like Christians should be nonsensical. It should not make sense to the people looking at what we're doing. All right, great. Thank you, Breezy. Trust God. Trust God even when it doesn't make sense. I think for us this morning, you have been asked to do things that make no sense. You've been asked to do things that culturally are out of place. Because again, the moment we're in, culturally speaking, is a weird moment. And to behave as God would have us behave is out of place in our culture. I would encourage you this morning to trust God anyway. My last couple of thoughts this morning are I want to remind you again that these battles aren't won by military strategy or by human strength. They're won by God. If you are hoping in this culture, if you're hoping for the right power source, okay, if you're hoping for the right election results, or if you're hoping for the right we're just gonna leave it as broad as I can. If you're hoping for the right power source to be in place, that was the fastest I've ever seen Dwight move. I have no idea what's happening out there. If you're hoping for the right power source, I would remind you that the right power source is God. And so we trust that is true. So we do what God says, even when we struggle to understand why, and trust God when it doesn't make sense. All right, we're going to pause here for today. I want to give you plenty of time to go get your kids. I do, however, before we leave, I want to make a couple of quick announcements just so we're all on the same page. First of all, next Sunday is Mother's Day. If you have been following our announcements, the week after Mother's Day is when a lot of things are changing. Next week is going to look like this week. We are going to have an outdoor service, hopefully, weather permitting. We're going to have an outdoor service, and then we're going to have class just like we're doing now, and then we're going to have a second service. The following week, the week after Mother's Day, I'm going to make this announcement every week. Well, I guess just this week and next week. Everything's going to change. Everything's back open. All of our adult classes will be operating. I will be in here. We're going to be on kind of a teacher rotation in here with myself and Ken Ford and Claude Michael. We've got, I know Kurt and Jason are doing their class, which I want to talk to you about that. So, and I know there's some other classes that are going on. I'm going to give you more detail about that next week, but we have full slate of classes open. We are not doing what we've been doing up to this point where it's only limited to the parents and grandparents of kids. We're opening the doors as of 2 weeks from now. So please make plans to attend. That is Reunion Sunday. Do me a favor. Try as best you can to be here. And then that would be a good week maybe to bring somebody so that you can reconnect to your church family in a meaningful way. I'm not going to announce it, but also keep in mind that second service is going to be, there's going to be some changes to the protocol. If you want the lockdown, masked on, safety protocol service, first service will be for you starting in 2 weeks. And then our second service is our Wild West service. We're just going to be screaming in each other's faces, and I'm kidding. Just read the thing. Read the thing. We're still going to wear masks on the way in, but then it's going to be crazy. All right, so I'm going to close us out in a word of prayer, and then if you would, go get that in our prayer as well. All right, if you would, bow with me. Gracious Father, Lord, I come to you this morning grateful, amazed by the opportunity that you give us to spend time together, to spend time in your word, to spend time with brothers and sisters who share this common thread of you. Father, I am in awe of how uplifting it is to be able to spend that kind of time together. And I pray that in this moment where the world has changed and where the culture has shifted its values, I pray that you will give us the ability to fight through the temptation to devalue this time of spending time together in your word. Father, I pray this morning that you'll give us the courage to recognize when you're calling us into the fight. I pray this morning that you'll give us the courage to recognize when the battle is yours, and you'll give us the courage to do things that don't make sense because we feel compelled to do them by your calling and not by ours. Father, I pray especially that you'll give us the ability to distinguish between the two. You'll give us the ability to recognize when it's your voice calling us into action and fight those moments where it's our selfishness calling us into action. Father, I pray that you'll be with this group of people. I pray that you'll be with this church family. I pray that you'll be with this community. Father, I don't know the details, but I pray that whatever our health situation was here just a few moments ago, I pray that your hand will be on that as well. Father, I pray that you'll bless this morning. Bless the children who are in our kids program, and let them take this moment of the Battle of Jericho. Let them take it home and let them grow in you as a result of the education that they get in your word. Father, I ask these things through your Son. Amen. Thanks, everybody.